Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual preview crew of Brandon, Marianne, Lee, and Dan Schneier. Yes, your clock is not off. We are coming to you a couple hours earlier if you're one of the dozen or so people that watches this live. But hey, it's the Dodger game, and we all have priorities. But first question to both of you. I was thinking about this the other day. I wanted to know, and then I'll relay my own story, of course, the most trouble you've been in because of fantasy football. And it could be with your significant other, with your job, with your parents, whatever. So, Dan, you're up first.
Ooh, most trouble I've been in.
Like, yeah, did you lose and break something? Like, did you ignore somebody because you were checking your scores, which I am
okay. I remember. Like one story. I got something. All right. Because I was like, I don't know. Fantasy football has been a nice thing in my life. I don't think I got too much free from it. But I do remember one thing. So I was probably, I was probably a freshman. It was the summer of my freshman year in college. And my mom was like a big supporter of the idea that you need to go get all these internships, unpaid or not. It doesn't matter. Internships are great on your resume. They're going to provide you with like unbelievable experience that is priceless. Meanwhile, after doing 2 of these in my life unpaid, I would never advise the same thing.
Yeah, it's all BS, people. Like, if you're listening, considering that.
Any job I've ever gotten has no clue or care about the 2 internships I did. But anyway, I was working with an unpaid internship in New York City, and I was commuting in every day. So I was paying to commute in, basically paying to work in the city. I was at it was a PR firm. And at the time, it was a financial PR firm. And at the time, I wanted to do something in journalism. Like, that was my major, and that was going to be my focus. But I had no idea at the time what it was going to be. So I was like, all right, my mom knows the CEO, whatever it was of this company. We'll do it. So I'm working this job, and they're keeping me there like 8 hours a day, like legit work. It wasn't just like filing and stuff. I was like helping them like craft like all sorts of PR stuff and like press releases and like doing a lot of logging and stuff. Anyway, during the day, a lot of the times I was still at that point addicted to fantasy football, and I would just like look at my teams, look at the players, like, screw it. I mean, like, I'm working for free for you guys. I'm gonna take some of this time to myself. Like, anyway, one day, like, I went out to get lunch, and I forgot to minimize the fantasy football standing screen in my whole league homepage. And I get back, and there's just a big Post-it note on my computer, like, Dan, this is unacceptable. Stop looking at fantasy football at work. And like, I was like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm so sorry. Like, I can't believe it. I'm this like young kid just trying to make a good impression. In my head, I'm like, you know what? Screw this. I hate this job. I would never work at your company. I'm just doing this right now, so I'm not a quitter. And that was the story of how fantasy football got me screwed over a little bit.
Well, and you got to like the passive aggressive, like, Post-it note, right? Like, not even like, hey, Dan, can we have a word?
Oh my God. Like, this coworker was the queen of that. She used to always do stuff like that. It's the worst.
Yeah.
Who uses Post-it notes as like forms of communication? Ew.
Well, I mean, that's technically what they're supposed to be for, but maybe
they're reminders. They're reminders for yourself. You write down, like, take out the dog.
You're communicating to yourself to do something. So, but again, the tone of the note, Dan, is
the tone was way off.
So anyway, Brandon, you trouble fantasy football, go.
I think I just get in trouble with my husband and family for checking Twitter all the time. So it's really
not really a fantasy football problem as much as a Twitter problem.
Twitter, yeah. Well, and especially, before games or like when the injuries are coming out or what have you, I'm usually pretty addicted to my phone. And so I have tried to make a commitment to Fridays. I don't walk around with my phone in my head, phone, I should say. So Fridays are my one day where I am oblivious, and I wake up on Saturday morning and the whole world is falling apart. And I'm like, what happened?
That's usually when stuff happens, is on a Friday. So you need
all the injuries come out. Yeah. So it's actually, but it's the one day I don't quote unquote work. I mean, I have one article, but it's due by 9 a.m. So then I'm done for the day.
Right.
So that's the compromise, is that I spend 24 hours in the dark, basically. I mean, I can kind of check, it depends, but not much. So basically I'm terrible at being this way.
Yeah. Well, if you get a mobile alert, then you have to check it, and you have no choice. So
it does pop up, and it's stressful.
There you go. Yeah, I'm pretty guilty of the whole, like, hey, we're at dinner with people and I'm on my phone, and like, I remember one time I was doing pretty well on DraftKings, and like Dante Moncrief was going off against Pittsburgh, And like I was just climbing like the chart, and like my wife was like, can you stop, please? Like not the like jovial, like, hey, can you get off your phone? It's like, no, you need to get off your phone. Because like it was with her parents or something like that. But I
don't go anywhere during the games.
See, but in my mind, I was like, look, we could be like millionaires. Like this is important, which not really. Like I didn't even come close to that. But still, it was like a good amount of money for that,
Oh, yeah.
But then my better story was probably, and I'll make it quick because we do have to actually talk about the game this week. But my better story was in the 5th grade, which, yes, I was doing this in the 5th grade. And this was pre-internet, which really makes me sound older than I actually am. But it's when you would bring the paper and you had to do the scores that way, the USA Today, because it had all the box scores. So I would bring it to class because, like, I was pretty bored. And it was kind of like you, Dan, with work. It's like, look, you're not paying me to be here. Like, technically, my parents are paying you all for me to be here, right? Like, these are my surrogate tax dollars. Anyway, so I'd bring it, and my teacher was like, what are you doing? And it's like, I'm like, it's fantasy football. What are you talking about? And she's like, well, is there money for it? I'm like, well, not everyone does it for money, but we were like, yeah, like, why else would you do it? And she was like, okay, well, I'm going to go call my police officer friend because I don't think this is legal. And I was like, holy crap, like she left the room. She did the whole like, dramatic, I'm going to call like your parents kind of thing. So like I started bawling in class because like I never got in trouble. I wasn't like that. And I thought I'm going to jail even though I'm like 9 and like this is the end of my life. So she came back and luckily was like, okay, I'm not going to do anything, but you need to put it away. And I was like, well, what changed your mind? Like all of a sudden she goes, well, my cop friend does it too. So he said it was okay. Thank God, lady. And I never forgot. It was Mrs. Helms. I don't know if she's listening. Probably not, but thanks a lot, awesome. Mrs. Helms. You totally.
Wouldn't it be awesome if she's like a total shark now?
Yeah, that's what prompted
the DraftKings leaderboard, Mrs. Helms.
Yeah, she found this punk kids fantasy stuff, and that's what started her on her path. So,
you never
and if she
know.
did, great. Then I'll take full credit for that.
Yeah.
Anyway. Let's get to week 7, you two. First of all, we will get into some fairly significant injury news, which will have some pretty big impact on this week's games at least. And then a little later, we'll get into some of the juicier matchups for our fantasy players, along with some players you should definitely avoid. And then finally, what should be some high-scoring games, which of course are going to be very advantageous for all of our fantasy teams. So first up, let's get to some injury news. Probably the bigger one, I would say, Ben Roethlisberger. Probably going to be out at least, I mean, low end is 2 weeks, high end is 6 weeks. Enter Landry Jones. Dan, what can we expect from Landry Jones? And more importantly, probably what to expect from guys like Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a lot of questions this week. And shout out to the PFF Fantasy Twitter Takeover because that's helped me kind of get my name out there and get some questions. And if anyone wants to shoot your start sit or questions or anything like that, let me know. But I've gotten a lot of questions on trades with Antonio Brown this week. And my advice to the people who have asked me this is just, you know what? You can't expect the same kind of production out of Brown and Le'Veon Bell without Ben Roethlisberger. Landry Jones looked really bad this preseason, and he didn't really look very good last season when he subbed in for Roethlisberger during his injuries then. And the deal with Landry Jones is, and the deal with all Steelers fantasy players is, they're much better at home. Their home-away splits don't seem to make any sense, but they're actually the truth. And, you start this week, and we're going to see Landry Jones at home, but against the Patriots, who have our second-best run defense. I'm avoiding Le'Veon Bell in all daily fantasy. That's a lock for me. And I don't even think he's a good matchup in your season-long leagues. You're not going to bench Bell. He has the volume that most running backs don't. But I mean, these are the type of things that could come up with Jones. They're no longer a matchup-proof team anymore with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. And that's my take on Jones. I think it's going to kind of slow down the whole offense.
Brandon, do you generally agree with that? Landry Jones is probably one to avoid.
Yeah. Absolutely. The thing is that I wrote an article about this actually for Pro Football Focus. You can go check it out. And I am most concerned actually about the wide receivers that are not named Antonio Brown. That is a disaster. During the 4 games that Ben Roethlisberger did not play in last week, last week, could you imagine? Just doing back-to-back. It's like baseball, right? Hence the playoffs. But no, listen, without Ben Roethlisberger, all of the other wide receivers put together averaged 5.5 targets per game, only 45 total yards and 0.5 touchdowns. That's split among everyone. And the
Wow.
tight ends, this is what's so crazy. Only 2.25 targets per game and only 13 yards per game. No touchdowns in all 4 games. Now, here's the other thing. Running backs, though, to be entirely frank, get more work. It went from 18 touches to 24. 18 carries, to 24 carries. The same amount of targets, but again, a huge dip in touchdowns. They would average 1 touchdown per game as opposed to 0.5 touchdowns per game. But the run game will stay consistent. I think that, again, though, daily, it's not good enough. But if you're in a season long, I'm not as freaked out about Bell as I am. I'm running from Coates, Rogers, Wheaton, Jesse James. Bye. All gone. No.
Which is really unfortunate, at least for James in my mind, because he was actually putting together a pretty nice little season in Ladarius Green's absence. But now, yeah, I agree. I think without Roethlisberger, it's not going to be good. So, all right, let's go to the other, a other injury that we had this week. So Eddie Lacy officially ruled out for Thursday's game against the Bears. The Packers will have a smorgasbord of people running in that backfield between the recently traded for Nile Davis. Randall Cobb may get some snaps at running back. Ty Montgomery might get some snaps at running back. They signed somebody off the practice squad named Don Jackson. Dan, I mean, is this another sort of radioactive situation to avoid, at least for this week?
No, I don't think so. I actually think that you can get a nice floor play out of Ty Montgomery this week. We saw it last week. Montgomery was very involved in the offense, and the way that offense works, and I've seen this a little bit with the Giants too, who are on the same scheme. They can really work with that receiver out of the backfield instead, because a lot of their run game can be, they can get their running game going via the short passing game. That's kind of something we saw from the Packers a couple weeks ago, and then we saw from the Giants last week. It's similar schemes again. So I think they'll use Montgomery again how they used him against the Cowboys. I think he's going to, have a really good chance at seeing like 11 to 14 touches. Obviously, he doesn't have the eligibility just yet at running back position, at least not in Yahoo. I'm not sure across the other leagues. I'm sure it's pretty similar though. But you can still play him in that flex or that wide receiver 3 position on your fantasy team and expect to get definite volume from him. I don't see Nile Davis playing this week. You're not just going to pick up that scheme in 3 days. There's no way that they're going to put him out there to protect Aaron Rodgers. Don Jackson's interesting. I think it's kind of like could be a hot hand with Jackson. If he really looks good early, they'll keep going to him. Otherwise, they might just do the Montgomery Cobb thing. But yeah, I think Montgomery's the play here, and I don't think you should avoid this situation against the Bears defense.
Okay. Brandon, let's get to the other running back with a injury this week, Carlos Hyde. Definitely out for this week. It looks like maybe just this week. Behind him, though, we have a little more definitive answers there. We've got Mike Davis, who outtouched Sean Drone in Hyde's absence last week. Is there anyone to own there, and who would that be for this week against the Rams? I'm sorry, against the Bucks, not the Rams.
Yeah, well, I think it's Mike Davis, and again, it's against the Bucks. Great.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a good matchup to get your start in. I don't really like the whole Green Bay situation. And, it's interesting, Eddie Lacy was actually putting up some pretty decent stats. He had our highest Pro Football Focus elusive rating out of the whole National Football League. At second, it was David Johnson, and he's a whole 20 points behind Eddie Lacy. He was actually doing a lot more behind that line on his own, regardless of his weight, which, by the way, I'd love to never hear about his weight again. It's so boring. But, he was doing a lot. I don't think Nile Davis is even close to that. Whereas I think that Mike Davis has some similar skill sets here. We haven't seen a whole lot. He's kind of a flashy guy, preseason guy that people were kind of getting excited about. But we've definitely seen more from him recently than Nile Davis. So for me, if I have to choose between the two of them to start someone, I'm going with Mike Davis, although on the other side of that, Doug Martin's out now, maybe for weeks. So those of us that picked up Jaquiz Rogers feel like little geniuses right now because thank God, at least someone's there. And the guy got, 30 carries last week or the last time that they played. So there are some good options out there finally at running back, and hopefully you got them on waivers. But yeah, certainly I think that Mike Davis absolutely needs to be there. And I'm concerned for all these guys' health moving forward. You got to hold on to some of these guys. Don't let go. Don't think that this isn't going to happen to you. So I guess that would be my advice from week 7 on, really.
Well, and actually, real quick, you bring up a good point. Another injury, which is Doug Martin, who did suffer a setback and looked like he might come back this week, but isn't. And as you mentioned, Jaquiz Rogers is probably the guy there. So, Brandon, let's ask you first to rank those sort of fill-ins between Rogers, Mike Davis, and let's just say Ty Montgomery over in Green Bay for
Why
this
not?
week. For this week.
I would go with Jaquiz first.
Okay.
Because he's already done it and he doesn't have competition. And then I think Mike Davis, and then I think Ty Montgomery. I think they're going to get cute with Ty and Randall Cobb, but I'm not quite
we
sure
might
I
as well
want to
just
get
say
involved.
like insert Green Bay running back and then pick one. So
yeah, I don't think anyone is ready, and I actually think this is a coaching failure that they don't have someone to back them up. To be entirely frank, they should have fixed this 2 weeks ago.
Right. It seems odd to roll with only 2 running backs, period, on your 53-man, but that's okay.
They haven't even activated Don Jackson yet.
Well, he was getting touches with the first team, but yeah, the point is made. Yeah,
but he hasn't been activated. He's just with part of the practice squad still. So that's not even a guarantee yet.
Right. So, Dan, what about you? If you could rank Rogers, Mike Davis, and random Green Bay running back, how would you rank them?
I would go Quiz 1. I would go I'd go Montgomery 2. I'm gonna call him the random Green Bay running back in this because I do still get a lot of touches. And then I'll go with Mike Davis last. So a few points. Rogers to me is really an amazing play this week. He looked rejuvenated in his start against the Panthers, and that was still, the Panthers obviously aren't what they were last year, but they're still a solid defense with Luke in the middle, and they do have Short and Latulite in the middle at defensive tackle, even though they're not playing well this year. It wasn't the worst defense, and he looked really good. And now he gets a 49ers run defense that's in complete free fall without Navarro Bowman. They're now our second worst run defense behind only the Colts. They're the worst. And I think that's going to keep dropping without Bowman in the middle. I think it's an unbelievable matchup for Quiz. I think there's going to be a lot of volume because they're facing the Chip Kelly offense, which means more offensive plays. And again, like Brandon said, there's really no competition for him, and he really is dominating the touches. They'll get the Peyton Barber guy, the rookie out of Auburn, involved a little bit, but he didn't show much. And then just onto Mike Davis. I did scout him a lot coming out of South Carolina. To me, he was one of those do-it-all backs. He was a little more explosive than kind of a Cameron Artis-Payne, if that makes sense, but he's kind of the pass protect, can run between the tackles, and can catch kind of guy. Those guys I usually don't get too excited about, even in the best matchups. They tend to be very touchdown dependent, so I'm not too high on him. I think that Montgomery has the higher floor.
Okay. So moving off of running backs, we had a quarterback change with the Jets this week where Geno Smith was officially named the starter, at least for 1 week. Brandon, let's go with you first. So, obviously Ryan Fitzpatrick was pretty bad so far this season. What can we expect from Geno? And, what about the other Jets players? I mean, Brandon Marshall seems to be the only still viable fantasy option there at this point.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think a lot of us had some positive feelings about Quincy Enunwa when we saw him on the field with both Decker and Marshall when Ryan Fitzpatrick was firing on all cylinders. And it was a really exciting time, right? It was like, oh, yeah, great. This is the next guy. And now it's kind of, Well, listen, we haven't seen significant play from him since 2014. I don't know what else to say. In the preseason, he was fine, actually. But it is a completely different beast here. I don't think it can be worse, though, than Fitzpatrick, to be fair. I know that sounds crazy, and I'm about ready to start talking about Carson Palmer this way, too, so don't you worry. But I would say that whenever someone's thrown 11 interceptions to 5 touchdowns, it is time to put them on the bench, and you hope that the next guy can do at least a little bit better. If they can just hold on to the ball, they could get down the field, and then they do have playmakers that can make things happen. I still believe in pretty much all of the talent on that team, as far as I think Bilal Powell can still do things, as a pass-catching back. I actually do not think Matt Forte is as terrible as he seems. He's in the worst possible situation I've ever seen him in, and he played with Cutler for years, so that says a whole lot. And Brandon Marshall is still talented. I don't hate it. I think it's fine. Wait it out. I think that probably come week 10 or 11, there's going to be some golden nuggets for those bye weeks, and hopefully that's where we can get them.
Dan, what about you? I mean, I think I saw some stat where in Geno's games with Marshall that he still gets like 40% of the targets anyway. So like I can't see Marshall dropping off that much from what it was with Fitzpatrick.
Right, and I mean, I think Marshall's still going to be the key cog in this offense. You brought up a great point with that stat, and I think I read something similar to that. And it's just for me, it's just sad because I was hoping Geno would get a chance to play with Decker and Marshall at the same time, just because Jets fans are so quick to really enjoy when he's struggling. Geno Smith, like I remember the Monday night game, there was a lot of chatter on Twitter once he threw that interception. Like, I knew this would happen. Like, it's Geno, we hate him. But like, you know what? Honestly, Ryan Fitzpatrick had a lot of opportunity last year with both Marshall and Decker for the entirety of the season. And, it would have been nice to see that with Geno. We're not going to see that. And I think that the offense will funnel through Marshall, even more so with Geno, because, he's just he's not as experienced in that offense. He doesn't have many reps, and that means he'll probably lean on the number one target.
All right, one more note for this week. I know, Dan, you had brought up Jay Ajayi, who had, a pretty good game last week. Can he keep the job the rest of the season over Foster? I mean, Foster seemed like, he was going to be a decent pickup at the beginning of the season, but then he got injured and they didn't really have any running game for a while. And then Ajayi comes along and rips off 200 yards. So can he keep doing pretty well? Maybe not 200 yards a game, but, at least something productive.
Yeah, I know. We talked about we mentioned Ajayi a while ago on this podcast. I know I went to bat for him. Not everybody, you guys weren't on the same page, which was fine. And now
and you were totally right.
But you're not bitter about it, Dan.
Not right just yet about it, because we'll see. We'll see. I mean, he still has to battle this Miami offensive line, and then once Foster does come back, if he can stay healthy, he might still have a kind of like a passing down role. But the way I see it is this with Ajayi. At every single snap he's played in the NFL, when he's been given the opportunity, he's been one of the most elusive runners in the NFL, according to our statistics, and one of the best runners independent of his blocking. I mean, we're talking about a guy who has an average yards per carry of 5.7 this year. He had 204 yards and 25 carries last week. He's forced 10 missed tackles on just 56 carries, and he's had almost 4 yards per after contact per attempt. We're talking about numbers like only Le'Veon Bell has more yards after contact per attempt this year. Only Bell, David Johnson, and Eddie Lacy, who Brandon mentioned earlier, has a better overall elusive rating. So we're talking about somebody who's one of the best backs independent of his blocking this year, and he had the same thing last year. I mean, last year he forced 14 missed tackles on 56 touches. He had 3.35 yards after contact per attempt. Last year was only Dion Lewis who had a better missed tackle rate, and Le'Veon Bell with more yards after contact per attempt. So I know I'm saying a lot of numbers here and I'm saying a lot of mumbo jumbo, but that's kind of what we do here at Pro Football Focus. And I like to look for these guys that stand out in this metric. It's a big thing for me when you're really elusive and when you can really do a lot independent of your blocking, because it shows me that you just need the volume, and it looks like he's finally getting the volume. Finally, Adam Gase realizes that his 4 running back committee is not going to work. And I think people are very quick to rule out players. I saw this last year with Devontae Freeman. The narrative starts to turn. It starts to become this negative thing on Roto-World blurbs, on everywhere that people read for news blurbs. And the same thing happened to Ajayi this year. And I hope that people don't make that same mistake with Devontae Freeman, because you know what? Foster has not had a good track record of staying healthy recently. So I don't expect him to suit up for too many more games.
Brandon, are you ready to jump on the Ajayi train then with Dan?
I mean, the running back situation is so dire that certainly if you have him, you absolutely have to start him. I think the difference is, I think we all thought Foster was healthier than he is, right? They made it seem like he was going to play.
We all got sucked into that. We
all got sucked into that, except for Dan. But I mean, that was my thing, is that I just didn't want to have a guy who was in a timeshare of a timeshare, because that's all there is in Miami. Just timeshare after timeshare. So if they can commit to him, absolutely. I think that, Dan makes some great points about those metrics and what have you. Part of the problem is that he's not exactly the pinnacle of health either, Ajayi. So we got to weigh the injuries and the opportunities and things like that. But certainly right now, when we're talking about starting Jaquiz Rogers, we can talk about starting a Jay Ajayi. I mean, kind of goes hand in hand here.
Yeah, we have no shame. So
no, gotta do it.
All right.
Points are points.
There you go. All right. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we will get to our Week 7 preview. All right, everyone. Welcome back. First up, let's get to the good stuff, you two. So our juicy matchups of the week. So players that are playing some defenses that may be extra special and extra good for your fantasy team. Dan, I know you had a couple of guys, so let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm looking this week at least. I'm looking at players in kind of the lower. So last week, okay, we had Drew Brees, we had Cam Newton. The move was to use those higher priced quarterbacks in daily fantasy, right? This week, I think it's a little different because I think the matchups kind of point to the lower price guys. Two guys I really love this week are Andy Dalton and Kirk Cousins. And you can get them for dirt cheap daily fantasy. And as far as season long leagues go, these guys are probably either on your waiver wire in some 1QB leagues, or on your bench, or on someone else's bench that may be willing to trade them for dirt cheap. So I think that we're looking at two reasons why I like those guys the most. So first, we'll start with Cousins, who's going to face this Lions defense that just actually made Case Keenum look like a good quarterback last week. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know it was possible, but Keenum threw the ball well against this Lions defense. And again, it's in the dome, so should be no weather concerns. And Kirk Cousins in the passing offense has gotten going a little more lately. They have a high volume thing going there. They throw the ball a lot because they can't run the ball. And so he's probably my favorite play from a matchup standpoint. But for some reason, I just think Andy Dalton's going to go off this week. We're talking about he has a matchup with this Browns defense that really hasn't stopped anyone. They even made Ryan Tannehill look like a good quarterback on his way to 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. They really just don't have the talent. It's been a lot of bad drafts over and over and over again for that team. And I think that it's going to kind of be like a statement game for this Bengals team because they've had 2 really, really bad weeks in a row, and they're still a good football team with good pedigree. And I think we're going to see a big, big week out of Dalton and AJ Green. And if he gets Eifert back, him for sure. So Dalton, and those are my 2 favorite quarterback plays for the week.
Brandon, what about you? Who are some quarterbacks with some juicy matchups this week?
Yeah, actually, I do our DFS bargains article every week, and both Dalton and Kirk Cousins were top of mind in that article. And I'm going to add as well to that is Phillip Rivers at Atlanta. There's just absolutely nothing wrong with that matchup. Sure, they were able to hold a gimpy Russell Wilson, Paxton Lynch, and a Cam Newton / Derek Anderson combo a little bit at bay, but Jameis Winston, Derek Carr, and Drew Brees all threw 3 touchdowns or more against Atlanta. So I think that, San Diego, I'm a little bit concerned because Travis Benjamin is injured right now. He's not practicing. But frankly, Tyrell Williams has been kind of playing as the wide receiver 1 anyway. I think you could do actually a Tyrell Williams, Phillip Rivers stack and then, pay up other places and be pretty happy. Or a Phillip Rivers, Hunter Henry stack, who also has, a great matchup and a ton of upside and is super cheap. So I'm really liking the San Diego part of that game. And, that game is, I believe, they're the highest over under of the week. Hold on. Where are you? There you are. Yeah, at 53. Vegas has them at 53 right now. So there are no problems. 0.
And Vegas is never wrong, as we
never. They've never ever been wrong. But the good. I actually think it's a nice little way for me to baseline things. And I've agreed with them on most things.
Look, I wasn't being facetious. I may have said it sarcastically, but they know what they're doing there.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
All right. So running backs, Brandon, what are some running backs that we should look at this week?
Yeah, on the other side of that same matchup, I really like Tevin Coleman this week. San Diego actually gives up a ton of receiving yards to opposing running backs. In fact, they allow an average of 9 receptions and 69.3 receiving yards per game to the backs. And that's second only to Atlanta. So unfortunately, he can't play himself because this is the best matchup he's going to get other than at practice on the season. So I feel really good about him actually this week. And by the way, he's so boom or bust that people kind of have a hard time fully committing to him. And you should absolutely play the matchups with Tevin Coleman because Freeman is the volume guy. That we have said this over and over and over again. And then Coleman is the passing back and then the guy who vultures touchdowns. So if those things aren't going to happen, it's going to be hard for you. But against San Diego, I think he is absolutely a perfect candidate for that.
Dan, you have a guy that actually does all of that from vulturing touchdowns to receiving to getting the ball 30 times a game, right?
Yeah, we're talking about DeMarco Murray, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. DeMarco Murray this week against our worst worst rated run defense, and you might even get a little bit of lower ownership DFS wise. Obviously, if you're in season long leagues, you're never considering benching him based on the volume. But as far as DFS goes, you know, you're going to see a little bit of lower ownership after last week when he really only had a touchdown and nothing else. This is just, we watched that Houston Texans team run all over the Colts last week. They had no way to even stop them, even though they knew the run was coming and they had no threat of a passing game. You know, the Titans have a little bit more of a threat of a passing game with Mariota. He got going last week, and I think that'll help DeMarco Murray in this matchup. So I think he's the number one play at running back this week.
Okay. As far as receivers go, who did you want to promote this week, Dan?
I think this is the week, as long as when you're building your daily fantasy lineups that you want it. So last week we wanted to spend at running back. There was Lamar Miller, there was LaShawn McCoy, there was Le'Veon Bell, who didn't actually work out as well, and there's DeMarco Murray, who obviously didn't work out as well either. But even those guys were pretty solid plays. This week I think we're going to see the same thing. There's 4 guys, they're all at the top. 2, maybe either 2 or 3 are going to really, really break out, and then the other 1 or 2 is going to have a good floor. And that's AJ Green versus Cleveland. This is a lock it up, amazing matchup. Cleveland hasn't shut down anyone, especially number 1 receivers. There's Julio Jones. Brandon talked a little bit about that matchup before. That's obvious to me. There's Mike Evans in a high volume game, and he's really just such a high volume player this year. And then there's Odell Beckham if you're playing that other slate that includes the London game, because Beckham, you know, it's not only last week that he broke out. When he faced the Rams in 2014, he also had a $144 and 2 touchdowns, because you know what? The Rams don't use cover 2 every play. The Rams like to do a lot of cover 0, a lot of 1 high safety over the top, because they have Greg Williams, who really likes to blitz and get aggressive. And that plays into the Giants offense hands, and it definitely plays in Odell Beckham's hand, because if you get him the ball in space and there's only 1 safety to take him away, we saw what he could do last week on that 4th and 1. So those are my big 4 this week. I'm going to have exposure to all of them.
Yeah, and hopefully, you know, they've got some equipment over there that he can, you know, celebrate with or fall under or, you know, whatever. I mean, I think we all want to see that, right?
Oh, my God.
Come on now. Then just,
enough.
Huh?
I said enough of the net story, please.
So lame.
Well, and hey, one more note actually on Evans, that, you know, there was an injury update for Tampa, so Vincent Jackson's going to be out a while. Adam Humphries, who, you know, raise your hand if you had him on your team at the start of the season, is now the number 2 there. And look, he figures to see an uptick in targets. I mean, I'm not advocating go get him and spend a lot of waiver wire money on him, but look, they got to throw the ball to somebody else besides Mike Evans, right? Or do they? Maybe not. Maybe he can get 30 targets.
I think
that's what they do.
Yeah. Cameron Brate. Don't sleep on Brate.
I love Brate. I have him down too.
All right. Brandon, what about you? Some receivers to start this week.
Yeah, well, I'm going to look at the bargains again because top of mind. But Jamison Crowder is coming in and doing a lot with Jordan Reed's absence. I do not think Jordan Reed's going to be back this week. In fact, morally, I did not rank him. I won't do it.
Morally? Wow. Okay.
No, the concussion thing's like legit scary. 6
I
concussions
know.
since 2011. I'm done. I'm not. I'm not. As far as I'm concerned, he is not playing. And until I hear otherwise, I'm not going to rank him. But yeah, so Jamison Crowder's been actually doing really well in the slot. But he also caught his one and only target that was over 20 yards, and that was actually his touchdown. So he has, you know, quite a multi-dimensional kind of wide receiver that they need there in Washington. And like Dan was saying, their passing game has kind of come alive as of late. And Jamison Crowder hopefully will continue being a cog in that machine. You know, he started off the season being, you know, a really dynamic player in the fact that he had a ton of targets, right? So we were really excited. Then it tapered off and now it's coming back. So I kind of like him in this matchup. I also want to remind everyone that Kenny Britt had a great game last week. Congratulations. He had 2 touchdowns and, you know, he's on pace for his first 1,000-yard season and everything else. I think that's great. While everyone's talking about him, it was actually Brian Quick who had the touchdown upside before Kenny Britt. And Quick still had a pretty decent game, but towards the end of last week, he ended up on the injury report. So I don't think that they were playing him in the same way that they had before. So I'm actually looking to plug him in a little bit into my DFS lineups against the Giants, which I know is maybe a little contrarian, but I kind of like those super duper cheap. He's at the wide receiver minimum on FanDuel. You could do a lot with that. So I was kind of surprised because frankly, hey, I know the Giants defense isn't terrible, and I'm not trying to say that, but I do think that they're going to be able to move the ball a little bit. I think this could actually be a very interesting game. London games traditionally are very high scoring. If you go look at the over-unders traditionally, we did the last time, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's absurd actually how many points are scored over there. So someone's going to have to do it, and I think Brian Quick could get in the end zone. And if he's at the wide receiver minimum, you need him to just do that once, and he's already paid for himself. So it's something definitely that you should consider. And by the way, I know that a lot of people aren't playing Thursday night slates, but where are they going to raise Cameron Meredith's price? If we're going to talk about DFS, you guys, like, seriously, he is 43rd right now in FanDuel for price.
Yeah. And he has the most targets over the past 2 weeks of any wide receiver in the NFL.
Of anyone.
He has the second most fantasy points of receivers the last 2 weeks behind Beckham.
Yep.
It's absurd. He's and all those targets, he's still the 39th highest priced wide receiver on DraftKings, full point PPR.
Yeah, how do you fade him in a lineup right now?
I don't even know. Well, you fade him because he's on Thursday. That's it. Maybe that's why they decided to do it this way. They were like, well, you know what? We're going to tempt you to play Thursday night games so you can play this guy. I mean, maybe that's it, because there's no other logical reason.
No.
Well, you just blew everyone's strategy now, so thanks a lot, Brendan. But that's okay.
Sorry, everyone.
That's right.
So tight end.
Yeah, we'll find out. All right, so tight ends, Brandon. Who do you got this week?
Yeah, you know what? I was going to say Cameron Brate as well. I was going to talk about the Vincent Jackson injury and the fact that, yes, Mike Evans will get 30 probably targets, but maybe Cameron Brate's going to get the ones that we need in the end zone. And I like him a lot. And by the way, he is priced at the 18th or the 19th highest priced tight end. That is a bargain. He is definitely a top 10 play. When you look at the landscape of the tight end position right now, it's not even close. I'm also going to say that I think Kyle Rudolph's going to be fine at Philadelphia. I think they used him a lot, and I don't think anyone is going to play him whatsoever. So he had a rough game going into the bye, and I think people are going to be off of him. But I think that this offense is still intending on targeting him a ton. And this Philadelphia defense and offense, frankly, is just not the same since coming back from the bye. So I think that he might be a sneaky contrarian pick that you can slide in there. And by the way, he's priced outside of the top 10 as well, which based on his volume is ridiculous. So I kind of like him as just a sneaky contrarian, get back to the way we were kind of pick.
Okay. Dan, you have a bounce back candidate for this week too, right?
Yeah, I'm all over Delaney Walker this week. And obviously a lot of us got burned by Walker last week against the Browns. That was supposed to be an easy play, and really one of my favorite plays in DFS all last week. So I think now this week, just as it always is, people who get burned are way hesitant to use them again. So I think another amazing matchup against the Colts, and this week his ownership will be low. I think it's just a great time to buy in for Walker.
Okay, so for all of these players that have great matchups, there is an equal and opposite reaction, and some players will have a bad matchup. So Dan, let's start with you with some quarterbacks that you might want to avoid this week.
Yeah, I think, you know what? People keep tweeting me about Sam Bradford this week. I guess they're kind of trying to go right down narrative street. Will he try to really beat up on his old team, the Eagles? No, don't play Sam Bradford. Sam Bradford, to me, is really a completely matchup-dependent player, matchup-dependent player who you could really only get against, like, the Browns and teams like that. I mean, the Eagles have our 5th best pass rush this year, and that Vikings offensive line is still banged up. I mean, they're without their left tackle. They have a right tackle converted to left tackle playing over there. They're without their right tackle. And that was Matt Khalil, who's injured for the year. Andre Smith's out, their right tackle. This is, they've held up a little bit in the past 2 weeks, more than people expected. But now they're facing, like I mentioned, our 5th best pass rush. And I think pressure is going to be on Bradford all year. And I think the Eagles know how to beat him. And I think they will do everything they can that he doesn't like to see. They will get him rattled. And I think he's one of the worst quarterback plays of the week, even though some people are trying to tell me that, he might be a QB1 streamer. I wouldn't even play him QB2. And then, I'm also off Wentz. I'm off that entire game, really, for a fantasy standpoint. To me, it's something you want to avoid, is that maybe Rudolph, as Brandon brought up, just because, as she said, he's so cheap. But as far as the game goes, Pat Thorman pointed this out in his snaps and pace article. It's going to be one of the slowest games of the week. There's going to be very few offensive snaps, 2 teams that like to grind it out. And so why would we consider playing Wentz against this Vikings defense, which I think is the best in the NFL?
Brandon, what about you? Who are some quarterbacks you're avoiding this week?
Drew Brees.
Oh no, is he on the road again?
Yes, and he's going against Kansas City. They technically give up the
Yeah.
8th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And on the road, he's had 14.52 points and 11.88 points.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's I mean, it is what it is. I know he hates that people talk about this all the time, and like if I ever met him, I'd be like, "Hey, sorry about all your home split talk," but let's be honest, this just is what it is. So, in fact, this sounds crazy, but I'm considering not playing him and playing Brian Hoyer instead.
Oh
Wow.
God, no!
4 300-yard games in a
Wow.
row. Don't lie.
They don't. I also because we covered this on the podcast earlier this week. I think going back like a couple seasons, Drew Brees literally averages like 30 fantasy points at home, but averages like 16 or 14 fantasy points on the road.
Yeah,
like it's a legit thing. Like he does not do as well. So
like I don't think there's a possible way he's going to score over 20 fantasy points today or this week.
it's possible. Yeah.
Whereas I do think that Brian Hoyer could score 20 fantasy points with those cornerbacks all out in Green Bay.
And all to Cameron Meredith, apparently. So,
or Alshon, or I mean, Eddie Lacy's out.
Yeah.
That has been officially declared. So that's done. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how he's going to do it, but I don't see that. I do, however, again, though, if you're playing DFS, Michael Thomas is still so cheap that he's the only Saint that I would consider. So just.
And I think I saw something that he's actually out-targeted Willie Snead like 3 of the last 4 weeks. So, yeah, he's gaining steam on that.
But Willie Snead's also been hurt, to be fair. But
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some running backs, or who are some running backs, Brandon, that you're avoiding this week?
Man, there's so many that are hurt. I'm not quite sure I have any opinion on this. I think at this point, I'm like, oh, are you playing?
It's just a war of attrition. Just take who you can.
Yeah, great. No, I'm going back and forth about how I feel about the running backs in the slow-paced game that we're talking about here with Philadelphia and Minnesota. I can't decide. I think I'm going to do exactly what Dan's saying. I think I'm just, even though we think they're going to run it out, I think I'm still fading them. All of them. Okay. I think every running back in that game, even Darren Sproles, who at least has some oddness on his side, but I don't know. How do you guys feel about the guys in that?
I was going to say, if you think about it, there is no bankable option on either team. Because Minnesota, they toggle between Asiata and McKinnon, even though, McKinnon is fantasy Twitter's favorite running back ever. And then Ryan Matthews look, we all want Ryan Matthews to be a thing. We really do. But for whatever reason, they're just not giving it to him as much as a bell cow back normally should. I mean, they still give carries to Kenjon Barner and to Smallwood. And like you said, Sproles. I mean, there's just no, I guess, guy that you can trust on either side of that. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, as far as those backs go, Jared McKinnon is not just a fantasy Twitter thing, or maybe I'm just a part of that whole big, mess. But I love McKinnon.
You're too close, Dan. No, you're too close.
You are too close. You got to step away.
Too close and step away. But you know what? We'll see who's talking when he has his breakout, like Ajayi did. But anyway, as far as this week goes, no, I do not think he's a great play this week in that game. But two guys that I'm trying to avoid, aside from Le'Veon Bell, who I mentioned earlier, I hate Matt Forte this week. I think Matt Forte, if you're playing Matt Forte in your fantasy league, you're just not doing it right. He almost played less than 50% of the snaps last week. They started to go to Bilal Powell once they fell behind the Jets. The Jets are one of the worst teams in the NFL. They're going to be behind a lot this year, and they're going to have to lean on Powell a lot more going forward. It makes Forte a really bad play. And the Ravens have our number 1 ranked run defense. The Giants ran for under 2 yards per carry against them last week. And that's been the case for most teams. So Forte is an awful play. I would not start him in any league, regardless of your situation. I'm sure you can find, Montgomery or Rodgers or Mike Davis off your wire, and I'd rather play them. And then I really dislike Gore. There's always that one team every year in fantasy football that has a surprisingly good defense, and people take forever to catch on to them. And this year, that's the Titans. The Titans are our 10th ranked defense this year. As far as run defense goes, they're even higher. I'm missing this on Tennessee. What are they in our run defense? Sorry, give me 1 second here. As far as run defense goes, they are our 10th best team as well there. And, they're struggling a little bit in pass coverage, but that's mostly just because they've gotten beat up with one cornerback. Aside from the one bad player on that defense, they're a really good defense this year, and they've had back-to-back weeks with 6 sacks. I think that whole Colts offense is going to struggle this week. That's an offense I'm completely avoiding everywhere I can. And Frank Gore is the big part of my avoid list.
All right, Dan. So real quick, some receivers that you are avoiding this week.
Yeah, for me, for the receivers, I think kind of like this is a week where I don't have anyone that I'm really avoiding per se. I would say, I want to say someone like Hilton because I don't like his matchup, but I just think the volume's there. A lot of the bad matchups for me are going to have higher volume, but I will say I'm avoiding Brandon Cooks. He obviously had a breakout last week, so a lot of people will be very high on him, and he'll have some very high ownership. I think he's going to come back down to earth with the Saints on the road and with the Chiefs at home there. So that's a guy I'm definitely avoiding, and I'm avoiding Antonio Brown because I don't think he's going to be the same player he was with Landry Jones.
And real quick, before we move on, can we all agree that we all need to move on from Philip Dorsett at this point? Are we all in agreement on that?
Yeah, bye.
Oh, yeah. I was so wrong on Dorsett, man. Oh, my God.
Dan, you weren't alone, my friend. Like I
couldn't believe it.
I was starting him in multiple
I don't even understand. He
weeks.
looked so good last year as a rookie. And I'm like, oh my God, look at this. He was a rookie. He barely had any time to get used to the scheme, to get used to the NFL. He's going to take a huge jump, especially with Moncrief out. Nope, the opposite. He's terrible. And I don't understand why. He must be playing through an injury.
I don't know. Right. Has to
my
be.
only explanation.
I mean, what I don't get is you spend a first-round pick if you're the Colts on the guy, and then, you don't pump him up as nearly as you could. I mean, Jack Doyle is out-producing you. But Anyway, Brandon, what about you? Receivers you're avoiding this week?
By the way, I was at the draft when they drafted Philip Dorsett, and actually that whole first round made sense, and then Dorsett happened, and everyone was like,
It was a collective shake my head at that point.
This makes no sense. You have so many needs. Why would you get this guy? It just zero sense. Anyway,
it just awesome. I don't know.
And it has yet to make sense since then. I thought maybe there was some genius thing that we just didn't understand, and then it got weirder and worse. The worst matchup is actually Monday Night Football. The Texans, Denver. You can't throw on either of them.
Right.
I don't want anyone in that game that's a receiver. It's really tough. And for the first time in perhaps my entire professional career, I ranked Emmanuel Sanders over Demaryius Thomas. I just can't do it anymore.
Wow. How does it feel?
I can't do it anymore.
How do you feel, Brandon? Are you okay?
No.
Dirty?
I'm not okay.
Probably feel a little dirty. You feel a little wrong, right?
His fumble was it for me. And I have a feeling that Kubiak was at home nursing his injury, being like, that's it for me too. No, I'm not saying, obviously they're going to play him, but I think that the splits, by the way, they've already been targeting Emmanuel Sanders more. This is not new news, but I think that now it's kind of solidifying itself in a really bizarre way. Also, it was so clear that Kubiak wasn't there coaching, and he usually plays puts in the plays as well. So clear. You should never have Trevor Siemian passing the ball 50 times. That is absurd. That's the worst game plan. There's no reason on the planet for that to have happened. The whole thing was bizarre. And I get it. They were filling in, and it was a weird game. But still, I think that both sides of the ball, as far as receivers are concerned, it's going to be tough sledding. So if you have someone else that's kind of comparable, if you're deciding between Thomas and Crabtree. A lot of people are doing that in kind of, shallower leagues, something like that. I think I'd go with the other.
Well, and real quick, so fun fact, I don't know how fun it is, but before last week, Emmanuel Sanders, and I got this from our own Scott Barrett, had out-targeted Demaryius Thomas like the previous 8 regular season games in a row. Yeah. Like it wasn't a fluke. Like they are targeting Sanders more than they are Thomas. And look,
another fun fact with Thomas, he has a negative receiving grade this year. He's once again in the top 10 in drops, like he was last year. And as far as overall grade, he's actually on the bottom, probably the bottom 4th of receivers PFF grade. So he's really not playing that well either. So there's a reason he's not getting the targets.
Yeah. All right. So those were players to avoid. We will end this episode with some high-scoring games to watch that might lend themselves to some some fantasy goodness. So, Dan, let's start with you. And I know, Brandon, you had mentioned the line before, but Atlanta and San Diego looks like a pretty good one for everyone involved.
Are we going to me or Brandon here?
Dan, we'll go with you.
Okay, yeah, sorry
Dan,
about that.
please.
Oh,
Dan Schneier for 200.
Yes, please
okay.
brace us.
I'll come in then, and I'll say
I'm
this.
wearing a Golden Girls sweatshirt right now, so I'm all weird.
I want a Jay Ajayi level hot take. So
well, you're not gonna. Okay, fine. I'll give you a Jay Ajayi. God, I can't pronounce that name right now. Hot take. All right, so everyone's going to want to get in on this Saints game just because it's the Saints and they have a 50.5 over-under, the second highest of the week. And I think that Brandon mentioned this earlier, but I'm with her. We got to stay away from this. The Saints aren't the same team on the road. The Chiefs are a grinded-out team that really, if they can run the football, they will just kind of deflate the whole game like we saw last week against the Raiders, and I think that'll happen again against the Saints. I'm staying the hell away from that game. I will not own anyone there in DFS. Maybe Spencer Ware, maybe Michael Thomas, because Brandon mentioned, as she said, he doesn't cost much, but otherwise stay the hell away. And then for me, I think a sneaky source of points is going to be this Washington-Detroit game because, these two teams don't play with the highest pace. With the fastest pace, and the over-under is kind of right there in the middle. But these two teams have really, really bad defenses this year, okay? Washington has Josh Norman. They have one guy who can cover. They're not really generating that much pressure, though. It's kind of been spotty all year, and Detroit can't do anything in the passing game aside from Darius Slay in coverage, so when he's in coverage. So that's probably my sneaky source of points, and the one I'm avoiding is that Saints-Kansas City game.
Brandon, what about you? We covered San Diego, Atlanta. What's another game that we could be on the lookout for?
I got a hot take.
Okay, let's hear it.
Deliver.
I believe the Millionaire Maker is going to make their money off of a bizarre, crazy Tampa Bay San Francisco game.
Wow.
Oh, no.
I think anything could happen there. It could be Jaquiz. It could be Vance McDonald. It could be
Curley for 200 yards.
Exactly. It's going to be the wild, wild west. Both teams are hot mess. We don't know what's going to happen, but someone is going to have a lineup that makes sense with that game. It's going to be bizarre. And that game is ripe. And the problem is I can't give you any analysis on it. There is no statistical evidence that any of these things are going to happen.
Does not compute.
To whom?
Does not compute.
Well, every week it's someone different for San Francisco, right? There's a Torrey Smith week. There's a Jeremy Curley week. There's a Vance McDonald preseason. There's a whatever. And then, as far as Tampa Bay is concerned, Jameis Winston's been struggling. We have not talked about that enough. There's a regression happening, and it's big time. They don't have any running backs other than Jaquiz Rogers now. Thank you, Jaquiz. And, Cameron Brate is actually coming alive, which is very interesting. But they were screwing around with that Austin Seferian Jenkins guy for too long, and they had to get rid of him. Talk about a disaster. So the thing is that that's what makes this game fun. Like, this is one of those games where, as like a football fan, I can't wait to see what happens. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can't wait. It's just a free-for-all. Chip Kelly. Now there's rumors he might try to get back to college as soon as possible so he can salvage a career. It's all good. All good.
Is it just, and we'll conclude on, because I have a hot take of my own actually related to this. I'm kind of encouraged by Kaepernick. Is that crazy? Like, he had a good, 16, 17 standard-scored points last week against a good defense on the road. Like, it wasn't like, he struggled. He kind of did, but it was against a good defense, and he still reeled off 60 yards rushing.
If you didn't watch the game, he looked in the box score pretty decent. Yeah.
I thought he did. Dan, are we crazy, or are you joining the Hot Take Express?
Well, no, I'm in on this hot take because I think anytime you can get any exposure to this Chip Kelly type game with all the pace and everything that goes with it, you have a chance at really a breakout tournament type game. But as far as Kaepernick goes, I watched a lot of that game on replay, and Torrey Smith got way open on one play that was actually really well designed by Kelly, and Kaepernick kind of just lobbed it up there, and the ball floated and died down, and he caught it and then made a really good play after the catch. I'm still not a believer in Colin Kaepernick. Obviously, that the rushing yards give him a nice floor, so I don't mind him in cash games. But as far as tournaments go, I see a little bit less of a ceiling than others might.
Sure. Well, no, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he's going to reel off 40 points, but look, if you're in a 2-quarterback league or something like that, and no, he's not going to score a lot of touchdowns because he doesn't have the players around him to do that. But look, he's going to run, and he's going to run pretty well. And look, I think the biggest difference is at least he's taking shots downfield where Gabbert literally physically couldn't, right? I mean, they did make an attempt to throw it downfield to Torrey Smith. It wasn't accurate all the time, but at least they were attempting it. So hopefully one of those, bombs sticks one of these times and they can get a long gain out of it.
I doubt Kaepernick will be the one that makes someone money, but Kaepernick is going to get someone else to make someone money. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's finally opened up the game enough where someone's going to go off. Again, no idea who that person is, but I'm very interested in this game from a fantasy perspective. And you know what? It would be nice to get 2 solid games of Kaepernick's exposure for us to analyze, right? Like, we're sitting here, I don't know what to tell you. It's also going to be weird because Carlos Hyde's out, but I still think it's going to be an interesting game. I think something crazy is going to happen. Big 25, 35-point game from somebody.
That or like one of the defenses returns a fumble 99 yards, and there you go.
Right.
So anyway, all right. Well, that will do it for this edition of the Fantasy Slant. We got a lot of stuff in, so hope everyone does well this week. For Brandon, Marianne Lee, and Dan Schneier, I'm Michael Moore, and we'll see you next time on the Fantasy Slant.